And we are live. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever it is you are in the world, and welcome to another edition of New York Street Magic for Living World of Darkness. Our scene finds us in the Temple of the Wheel, the casino, more specifically in the areas of the Chakravanti Chantry where the public doesn't get to visit. It is a place where magi can practice their craft, they can learn, converse, and generally exist with one another in a place of like-minded individuals. Maggie has been studying in the Chakravanti Chantry now for almost 3 months. In that time, she's had some serious ups and downs, but overall, she feels that she is moving further and further away from the orphan she once was. There's more gravity to her choices now, more responsibility than she initially realized when it came to magic. And she sits in a study area, sort of a nook, surrounded by bookshelves that reach up to about 10 feet in height on either side, sort of resting back on a cushion, with a text in hand, sort of laying on her lap as she is sort of wincing out of fatigue. She's been at this since, we'll say 11 o'clock last night, doing a sort of a cram session. And we can start our scene here.
As she's continuing to read from the materials of the library, she will, after maybe half an hour to an hour's of cram time, she'll hear a knock at the door.
She'll let out kind of a yawn, but it's, come in. She says, come in.
Oh. The door will open, and in will walk Rose. She's dressed in her usual sort of very plain, kind of drab suit. She's not smoking for once, though, seeing as she's in someone else's room, and she has a little bit of decency. Hello.
Maggie will spin around to sit up and look at her, setting the book off to the side. Rose, what time is it?
It's about 8 in the morning.
Wow. I lost track of time.
Did you sleep at all last night?
No.
No, sleep deprivation makes retaining information less likely.
Yeah, I know that.
She kind of to the books.
There's a good pile of them stacked up by the nook, and she just kind of shrugs. Yes, I know. I feel like I've spent enough time away at the Vigilant Tower that I'm losing ground here. I should be spending more time here.
It's a balance you'd have to find for yourself. How are the studies going?
Oh, they're coming along. Reading more and more about our history. She picks up a book. Reading right now about the issues in the Himalayas.
Yes, the history of all of our traditions tends to get quite interesting when you go to the times before the formation of the council.
So, it's not often that you come down to the study room. Most of the time I come to you. It's a rare pleasantry. To what do I owe the honor?
I'm unsure of how much of a pleasantry it is. I just came to take a look at your studies and how you were doing. You've been here for a few months now, so it's important to see if you're progressing at all.
She'll sit up a bit straighter and walk over to a small table where there are two chairs sitting on either side, and she'll sit down in one, offer a hand out to the other.
She'll take a seat as well.
I've made some progress, I suppose. I try to limit the amount of time that I'm distracted with the occasional times of recreation when I'm not here. I try to stay away from the bar scene as much as possible, and I try to meditate more than I did anyway. I spoke to at least one person who I feel gave me a bit more of a straight answer than I think anybody else would when it came to what parts of Maggie Keller were worth keeping, which ones were worth dying or letting expire, so to speak.
Really? Who did you speak to?
Anesthetic by the name of Naomi.
I see. What did she tell you?
I expressed to you the events that happened before, correct?
Yes.
She seems to think that I'm a monster. That the only reason I'm sorry is because someone had to tell me. And then that is a very serious problem. That I couldn't come to that conclusion on my own. In her, from her position anyway.
Do you agree with her?
Is it possible to disagree and I don't even know. She has valid points. I had honestly gotten so lost
Well,
up in the mix of magic, things it could do, watching others around me, that things like that didn't cross my mind until it was already too late.
indeed. From nearly the moment that many of us awaken, especially those of us who awaken with greater power and control, it becomes easy to distance yourself from humanity as a whole, from your human needs, your human desires. It's a pit that many magi fall into.
I didn't. For a while there was a part of me that had no remorse for what I did to Naomi. I was, at the time, I thought I was doing the right thing. If that makes any sense. That I was preventing her from getting herself into trouble or getting the rest of us in trouble through disclosure, breaking the rule of shade. Casual nature of
Mistake of
which. Go ahead.
It's the mistake of a narrow viewpoint. Unfortunately, in upholding our rules, sometimes you must be careful in how you do it. Surely you thought that you were upholding our rules, but it did little beyond foster hostility between yourself and this other mage.
Yeah. And I wonder if it comes down to it again, do I just stand by and let somebody make their own mistakes? Do I try and intervene, and if they won't listen to reason, do I just let them go on and potentially put others in jeopardy? Or, I mean, she looks up. I'm not. The idea of where to draw the line was clear before. Since studying here, it's a lot of things are shades of gray now. There's no easy answer, no definite yes or no. A lot of the times when I think about morality and magic,
A lot of these decisions are too large, especially for one person to make. When those of us among our tradition are deciding whether a thread needs to be cut or to be untangled, generally that is why we look to the wheel and to fate. For fate and the wheel tell us when things are beyond saving, more often than not. Much of the time, though, it does come down to the individual Euthanatos' decision. There is not always a perfect opportunity to call upon fate.
that she sits back and she looks visibly unsettled as she sort of chews on her lower lips, and she sort of has the ends of her sleeves in between her finger, sort of grinding them in between her thumb and forefingers. The prospect of that is absolutely terrifying. From where, I mean, just given everything that's gone on, different viewpoints, having to make that call is frightening at best.
There was no point in which I said this responsibility wasn't terrifying and stressful, but it's necessary. That's why tutelage in our ranks takes such an extended period of time. We cannot set off a young Euthanatos convinced that they have authority only to allow them to become the kind of monsters we fight.
And what gives us that authority to act? The wheel? The council?
We are chosen as people of the wheel. It is our divine duty to protect it, and that is what gives us our authority. It is also our position among the traditions, though they don't see it from the same viewpoint we do.
If you had been in my position that night, how would you have reacted?
Depends on how much of a threat to herself and the rest of us that mage was. I've never met this Naomi, so I have no judgments to make on her character.
Aside from being boisterous and, well, abrasive, I haven't been able to really track down any real marks against her, I guess, other than she is somewhat violent at times. Explosive is probably the better term. But
You do not uphold the laws differently for people based on whether you like or dislike them. If they are not dangerous but are simply unpleasant to be around.
no, I
There's nothing.
understand. I understand. So how else would you check my progression?
There's a reason that our primary field of study is fate. While full on communing with the wheel in a ritual is unlikely, it's much less difficult for us to tell what the best and worst possible outcomes of a situation are. In sensitive situations, sometimes it's a good idea to call upon that.
I've read some texts on the study of entropy. It's not an easy subject to grasp, but I'm trying. I haven't been able to manifest much out of it.
For many, it's not. It's much more ephemeral than many of the other types of spheres.
That would probably have been helpful that night. It would have been helpful in a lot of situations that I've encountered.
Indeed, in many cases, it is our compass.
Here I am drifting aimlessly in a very, very large ocean. She'll take a minute and then look over to Rose and she picks up a notebook sitting by her bag. It's something that she has kept any correspondence that she's had between any member of the Youth Thanatos and uh, most notably Rose. Something that she keeps here in the room, the dorm room that she's been afforded by the Chantry to study in. And she pulls out a sheet on it that has the questions that Rose asked her about 3 months ago. You know, I looked at this when you gave it to me, and my eyes grew to about the size of silver dollars. I sort of looked at it as a daunting test, daunting assessment. Well, I'm sure I don't
It
have
was
all.
it was meant to be little else.
She kind of smirks and nods. I don't have all the answers, but I am ready to at least give you what answers I can. And she shrugs and see where you stand on my answers. If I'm learning anything or if I have at least progressed far enough in your eyes and the eyes of the tradition as well. So by all means, please ask away.
Then, I believe the first one I'd asked you to discuss the role of cycles.
I know that everything that begins eventually has to end. It's how it how everything breaks down. Everything is ideally meant to break down and return to the cycle to begin again. Channeling forces through the spheres. You can feel it after using it that that energy doesn't go away, it dissipates and changes forms and feeds into other reactions around it. Whether that be a fire turning wood into carbon, which then can be tasked for something else. I know when working within my garden that I can feel there's a natural breakdown. Every plant that I compost feeds back to the newer generation. It's just natural. Everything that starts finishes eventually. Everything that finishes breaks apart and goes into what is new. It's one of the reasons why I'm guessing the Thanatos find creatures like vampires to be so abhorrent, aside from the other things that they can do. There's a visual sort of disgust as she says it.
And how would you apply this description to our magical workings?
In a personal sense or in a sense of the tradition as a whole?
In a personal sense?
I suppose that hmm, just takes a really, really long time to consider it. In my own practice, I I feel a connection when I tap in to the ethereal nature of what makes our magic work. I I can sort of feel it like, and she kind of holds out her hand like water running around me. And if I want something to happen, I can dip my hand into it and sort of divert some of the flow into a direction that I want it to go. I know that when I change something, it breaks down to a degree eventually. If I bend light or if I she sits back and she's actually kind of stumped on this one a little bit. I know for the application of the magic that we do, that I do, that I can alter how the cycle works to an extent, but it would be counterproductive to try and prevent it from doing what it needs to do. If that makes any sense to you.
She nods. Now, what on connection?
That's a bit easier. I can feel that a bit deeper than I can feel anything else when it comes to magic. Creation is a living thing in some ways. And that everything that I do, I know has a reaction. If I there's no escaping Newton's third law, so to speak. I know when I've personally that action and reaction have a certain effect on me. I can walk down the street and see someone who is struggling, sad. It sort of affects you. Feeling a tug at heartstrings, you know?
Mm-hmm.
If you violate someone's trust, you feel guilt. If I try and punch a wall when I'm angry, it's going to hurt. It's sort of the same way that creating a bond with someone is a type of connection. And when that bond is stressed or broken, it has a really profound effect on you. After Brandy died, I think I lost a good 10 to 15 pounds. I didn't eat, I didn't sleep. Losing Keith violently brought me awake in a way that was traumatic and enlightening all at the same time. I can. You can plainly look through the site of Prime and see how patterns are interconnected and interwoven into one another. I I wonder if that's why Jor is a real threat to Chakravanti. I know that taking someone's life and not having it affect you, or having it affect you, or trying to minimize that is a surefire way to experience that sort of plague on your resonance.
The things you are greatest connected to are your own actions. Whatever you put into this world, it sticks with you. And there are times when your karma, your aura can be cleansed, but there are times when it cannot. And that is generally when we are called in.
When the scales tip too far,
Right.
that I can understand.
I believe that our third topic was mortality.
We live and we die. Any living being is born and then expires. I've experienced that more than most. It's a natural way of things. When I reach my eventual end, if it comes from just the natural progression of things, when it's time, it's time. It's the same for my grandparents. It's the same for Keith and Brandy, Leah, I guess. mortality is just sort of a blanket term just to let us know that I guess everything that we are is temporary. And in the eyes of the wheel, our time is up when it needs to be up. And we'll come full circle again, eventually. Probably not in the same form, but in a manner of speaking.
There are magi and other creatures who use their gifts to skirt mortality. Where would you draw the line between productively lengthening one's existence and beginning to upset the wheel?
That's sort of a very subjective question. I mean, if there was a task that needed to be done, and you were charged with doing it, an argument one could make could be that until this task is done, I need to be here. You hear about it all the time, people who are sick, fighting on and persevering long enough to make sure that their families are taken care of, or to see a child born, hanging on just that long, and then soon after they let go. I mean, it's not really for any one person to say. Certainly not for me to try and skirt it, not now.
She nods. She'll take a look at the list of questions that she was given once again. Ah, guardianship as one of our tradition. Where would you draw the line between protection and looking out for someone and attempting to control them in a way that's abusive or in a way that can upset your karma and throw them off the correct path?
Well, given I've experienced this already, in a way, I guess. It's hard to put a real fine point on it, you know? I mean, you watch as someone does something that you know is a bad idea. I was worried that one of my dearest friends was clinging too tightly onto a material object for sentimental reasons. And I did the best I could to try and warn them of that. But in the end, I had to relent because it wasn't my place to dissuade them one way or the other. And in the end, it's actually worked out for the better. I took my hands off the reins, trying to steer the stagecoach away from a path I thought was a disastrous one, and Vigilant Tower is one of the more stable chantries in a physical sense here in the city. Um, Abusing your power and imposing your will on someone else. That's where you begin to cross that line into abusive levels of control. It's something I had to learn the hard way, where that line needed to be drawn. Going back on it now, if I had tried some other method or conferred with others, it might have been more prudent, might have prevented a lot of the hardships that I go through now. It's one of the problems I think I've had in the past is letting go and relinquishing control over the things that I wanted to protect. The only way I was able to come out of that quiet was by relinquishing that control, that desire to control.
Do you think that you have successfully?
I've made progress on it. I don't know if I'll ever be able to fully relinquish control, or at least a desire to control some things, to protect things, to hang on to things. But I don't let them hold me back, and that desire to try and steer the stagecoach away from the cliff when I see it coming is always going to be there. But I've gotten to the point now where I don't have to act on it. I don't know if that's the answer you're looking for or not, but it's the truth that best truth I can give you.
And what of self-control? What of your own discipline?
It took me a while to learn that magic is not a plaything. It's not a toy. It's not something there for my amusement. I've had a really bad track record with that when I first started out. At the same time, limiting distractions, things of that nature. That's been a tough journey. Knowing when to say enough is enough, when to hold my tongue, when to say something, when to step back and leave a situation alone, even though there's a part of me that truly wants to get involved. On that front, I think I've made progress. sort of mastering my own whimsy, the best way I can describe it, I guess. Putting a leash on it.
And what steps have you taken to cultivate this sort of self-mastery? What kind of things have you been doing to improve in that regard?
Reminding myself that not everything is a crusade. Not everything is a not everything is an opportunity to prove that I was right or somebody else was wrong. Sort of standing back and asking when it comes down to things that matter, just taking enough time to step back and ask a set of questions to assess things. Taking more into consideration how those actions are going to affect the world around me and around others. Trying to cultivate a bit more temperance through meditation, focusing on sort of getting my own, getting, getting a handle on my thoughts, clearing my head, remembering that discretion is the better part of valor is a very important mantra to remember, in a manner of speaking.
In that vein of thought, what are your thoughts of temptation, moderation?
It's always there. I can tell you that if I saw someone I was close to in peril, and someone offered me a means to save them, there would be a very deep temptation to accept it without question. And even then, if I thought the risks were worth the reward, temptation would run a lot deeper. Personal vices, I try to moderate the amount of time that I spend distracted. This process of studying within a tradition has been hard, challenging, frustrating, stressful. I mean, for you've only been tutoring me for 3 months. I've been at this for well over a year now. There are many nights where I just want to throw down the books and forget about responsibility for a while and go out to a bar or find someone I enjoy spending time with and just burying myself in them for however long. But certain life lessons, certain commitments I have here have stemmed that to some degree. I'm not out there every night like I used to be, forgetting about life.
Which lessons in particular?
Well, that instance with Emily, the vampire. What she did was wrong and borderlined on many kinds of assault. But at the same time, I feel like I let part of me go and just let myself be consumed by the ambiance. It doesn't justify what she did, but at the same time, I felt like if I was in control, maybe it wouldn't have happened.
Rose will nod. She looks at the rest of the list, but she'll simply fold it at the last question that she'd asked. What are your thoughts on our tradition so far? Do you still consider it to be the correct path?
It's helped me to understand a lot of things that I didn't before. It's given me perspective. It's it's placed structure in front of me in a way that I've never had. It's given rhyme and reason. A year ago, if I had been confronted by half the issues that I've seen rise up since studying here, I'd have acted brashly, impulsively, knee-jerk reactions. She kind of looks directly at Rose at this point. A year ago, I would have been on an all-out, all-out mission to exact some kind of revenge on that vampire. Not caring about what kind of disruption to the balance that might cause. Balance here to the city. As far as how tenuous relations are between the various supernaturals that are here to call this place home.
Nods.
been difficult. It's been taxing and trying, but it's done more good for me than anything else.
So you'd say that you wish to continue our studies? And this will be the last time that I ask this question. I know I've asked it many times.
You wanted to be sure that I was sure. That I didn't jump into this on an impulse or a wanted need to understand my own suffering. I don't think about that in the same light that I did. Keith made choices that had a certain specific outcome. Brandy associated with those of her own kind that brought ire of whatever force it was that killed her. Leah chose to be in that hospital to watch over me. Those choices had outcomes. Just like me choosing to study under you has had certain outcomes. Before I didn't respect that. I do now. She sort of deflates as she sits back, sort of saying that out loud for the first time since those events have gone on.
She nods. In order to become formally inducted as an apprentice, you would need a mentor. Among the Thanatos, we have our own specific terms for these things. And to our tradition, the most important thing in a young mage's life, or in this case, a recently recruited mage's life, among the Euthanatos, is that relationship between student and teacher. The teacher is known as the Akarya, the student known as the Chatra. To become officially a student of the Euthanatos, and by that extension, a member of the tradition, you'll need to be willing to swear an oath to myself in this tradition. We call it the vrata.
The vows that I made before.
Those were that was simply our code of law. This is more personal. Are you prepared for that sort of commitment?
What are the potential outcomes of making that vow?
In swearing the vrata, you're promising to not give our secrets to outsiders. You're promising loyalty to the tradition. You're promising loyalty to myself. Most of all, should you break our rules, should you fall to quiet, to Jor, should you find yourself a threat to the wheel, this oath swears me to hunt you down for punishment.
She takes a minute to think about it, and then she sort of stops and has this sort of quizzical look on her face, and then looks at Rose. Vow to you.
Yes. If I fail you, if I allow you to walk down a dark path, if I allow you to lose your way, it is my job to right that wrong.
She sits back and thinks on it. I think you've guided me this far with no obligation. At any point, you could have told me that it wasn't working out, or that I wasn't right. I wasn't the right fit. Under your guidance, I think I've changed in some ways. I've started moving towards being something better than what I've been. I'd You've been one of the most positive influences I've had from another mage. I can't see a reason why I should call that into question now. Under your tutelage, I feel that I could take this challenge on, walk a path that's worth walking.
And if you're sure, if you're truly prepared for that commitment, would you like to be my apprentice?
I would like that, yes.
She'll nod. And she'll reach into her bag and she'll pull out two very dusty leather bound tomes and set them down in front of her. These should assist you in dealings with fate. They should assist you in knowing more detail as to our history, so that you may know not the whats, but also the whys. This information is not to leave our tradition.
She looks at them. She sort of running her fingertips over the tomes. And she just says it very sort of open-endedly. Our tradition. And she sort of looks up at Rose at that point, probably seeking some sort of affirmation there.
Sorry, what was she asking?
She said she just kind of looked up as Rose said, our tradition, and she sort of echoed that, but more as a question, so to speak. Just saying the words for the first time and actually having something behind it and saying our tradition.
Rose nods. I will see you for proper indictment, after I've instructed you in the ways of fate, fortune, decay, and given you one last test. You should prepare as much as possible.
I still have obligations to my chantry, but I would like to. I'd like this to be more than just a place to study.
If you'd like a room here, one more permanent than this guest room, I could arrange that.
I would like that.
You will, however, expect some duties to the casino to be performed. As much as we'd like it to, it doesn't run itself.
I can understand that.
As for the clinic, if you're going to be working at the casino, you don't have to go there daily. But make sure to make some time for it.
I feel useful there. I wouldn't want to just simply disappear and give up on it.
He nods. Good. Then I will see you this time tomorrow for training in entropy.
She stands up and she looks at Rose, and it's really clear to see on her face she's debating whether or not to give Rose a hug. It's really, really evident.
Rose kind of looks at her like she doesn't quite get it, but she'll sort of open out her arms awkwardly.
Maggie gives her the kind of hug that someone who's thankful would give to another person. It's a tight squeeze, but it's very easy to kind of get the gist behind it.
Rose will give her a quick squeeze as well, Once again, she'll be met with the cold, sort of deathly pallor of her instructor's skin.
Maggie kind of she doesn't dare hold the hug too long. She kind of takes a step back and she just clears her throat. Um, I'll be here, and when the Chantry decides what an appropriate task would be for me to help out at the casino, I'm more than ready to undertake.
Excellent. Then perhaps you should get some rest.
Yeah, I probably should.
Good night. Or rest well, Maggie. And he'll give her a brief smile before leaving the room.
Maggie takes the tomes and carries them over to the bed in the dormitory and slips off her shoes, and or I guess she's probably not wearing shoes if she's indoors. So she just kind of puts herself on top of the bed and pulls sort of the Afghan at the end of it over her and lays her head down on the pillow, sort of thinking things over before sort of realizing that she hasn't slept in probably close to 20 hours and slips off to sleep. And I think at that point, we can call that a scene. Thank you, players, for playing. Thank you, watchers, for watching. Good night.